Welcome. Welcome to the last of our panels in the Modern Languages Vocab Diversity Initiative. This is the last of 4 panels this semester. And we are finishing this panel with one I think that's going to be super interesting, called Do You Have an Accent? So I'm going to give a brief introduction of our 3 speakers. Our 3rd speaker, we're trying to get in from Israel, and the hope is we'll be able to get it by the time he is going to speak. But in the interim, we have 2 fantastic speakers to begin with. So our first speaker today will be Elaine Chun. Elaine Chun is Associate Professor of English and Linguistics at the University of South Carolina. Her research examines how language practices reflect and shape ideologies of language, race, and racism in the United States and transnational contexts. Drawing on methods of international analysis and ethnography, she has investigated language parody and play among multi-ethnic youth, representations of Asian speakers in popular media, and linguistic hybridity in transnational youth spaces. Her work has appeared in Language and Society, Journal of Linguistic Anthropology, Pragmatics, Language and Communication, Discourse and Society, and in the forthcoming Language, Race, and Reflexivity, A View from Linguistic Anthropology, Oxford Handbook of Language and Race. She has won several teaching awards, fellowships, and grants, including the recent Digital Humanities Advancement Grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities. Our second speaker today will be Lydia Manatou. Lydia Manatou holds a PhD in Latin American, Iberian, and Latina cultures from the Graduate Center, CUNY. She is currently a lecturer of Spanish here at Fordham University. Her dissertation, Lengua, Identidad y Poder, Ideologías Lingüísticas en la Prensa Hispanófona de los Estados Unidos, 1980 to 2007, excuse me for my Spanish, examines how the rise of neoliberalizing logics in the United States and beyond set out the framework of newspaper discourse about language ideological debates regarding Spanish in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s. Her primary area of research are sociolinguistics, critical applied linguistics, bilingualism, language and identity, language ideologies, glottopolitics, and Spanish as a heritage language in the United States. Our final speaker will be Yossi Zabari. Yossi Zabari is one of the most popular spoken word artists in Israel. In this art form, he shares his experience as a Yemenite Jew and a member of the queer community. Zabari studied acting at the Beit Zvi School of the Performing Arts in Israel. He also studied 2 years at the Broadway Dance Center in New York City. Between 2015 and 2018, Zabari served as a member of the faculty at Beit Zvi, teaching acting, the spoken word, and directing students' plays. Currently, he teaches at the Goodman School of the Negev. As an actor since 2012, Zabari has performed in numerous plays in the leading theaters in Israel, including the Israeli Opera, the Kamari Theater of Tel Aviv, and the Bet Lesen Theater. Zabari has also acted in a few popular TV sitcoms in Israel and performed his own one-man shows. Between 1996 and 1999, he consecutively won the Creative Excellence Grants Program, aka Sharett Grants. Currently, Zabari collaborates with the Center for Liberal Democracy and takes an active role in the protest movement against the current government in Israel. So a great welcome to our 3 speakers today. They're going to speak for about 8 to 10 minutes each, and then we will open it up to the full roundtable of questions from everyone who's here today. Thank you for being here, and it's fantastic to have you at this extremely busy time at the end of the semester. Elaine, and I know Dr. Chun is going to be showing some images with us.
Hi, everyone. Let me just share my screen here. Let's see. Is that looking okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, thank you, Professor Clark and Professor Huang for the invitation to be part of this roundtable, to be able to talk about this interesting question of do you have an accent? And thank you also to Lydia, fellow panelist, and our other panelist who hopefully will arrive soon. As many of you already know, the question, do you have an accent, is one that that we contend with in our everyday encounters, especially if we find ourselves in a position of marginality, whether defined by race, class, region, religion, nationality, and sometimes even gender or sexuality. So it's a question that many have asked ourselves, regardless of how we actually speak, that is, whether we are heard as having an accent or whether we're not heard as having one. So as I think through this question, I'll divide my short 8-minute statement in 3 general parts. In the first, I'll discuss a seeming irony. In the second, I'll discuss the problem. And then in the third, I'll address a caveat as I gesture towards a very general solution to the problem. And since my research primarily addresses issues of race and language, I'll approach this question as a racializing one, though it's certainly worthwhile to think about the ways in which this has broader applicability to these ideas, to dimensions outside of race, beyond race, or sometimes that may be inseparable from race. For instance, in the case of class, region, religion, or nationality. So first, the irony. So to a person of color, it's often hearable as a racist statement when a white person tells them that they have an accent or represents them as having an accent. For example, through a racializing, mocking caricature of their language. So a classic example of this might be, Hank Azaria's representation of Apu on The Simpsons, or maybe a less classic example is the recent mocking caricature by Rudy Giuliani of a Chinese accent caught on hot mic after an interview. Yet it is often also felt to be racist to a person of color when a white person tells them that they don't have an accent. Such a statement is often framed by the white person as a well-intentioned compliment, an ostensible claim of linguistic inclusiveness and cultural commonality. And yet it's a claim that some psychologists have described as racist microaggressions, much like some other familiar microaggressions. Your English is so good. Where are you from? Oh, you're Korean. I love kimchi. How can we understand the seeming irony? A white person engages in racism, whether they claim that a person has an accent or whether they claim they don't. Are we putting white people in an impossible position? Unfairly damned if they do, damned if they don't? So I want to briefly think about the problem of the claim you have an accent. So in our folk usage of this term, an accent is a property of speakers whose pronunciation diverges from some norm, some imagined ideal. In some cases, this ideal is shaped by what we hear in our own communities, such that it's the outsiders to our race, region, religion, or class who have those funny accents. Yet in other cases, this ideal is shaped by relations of power, such that it's those at the sociocultural margins who get heard as speaking with an accent. For example, a Mexican American from Los Angeles or Korean American from New York might learn to hear members of their own community as using accented English on the basis of their own racial marginality. However, linguists often define accents differently from our folk usage. Accents get defined as the patterns of pronunciation used by speakers of any language variety. In other words, accents are rule governed, meaning that it's not arbitrary, but rather systematic. And as many of you have probably heard in your introductory linguistics courses, everyone has an accent. So linguists often present this as both a factual claim and social critique. It's not merely false to think that someone doesn't have an accent, but it invokes racist and classist ideas. So as linguistic anthropologists Jonathan Rosa and Nelson Flores have argued, what we perceive to be an accent is not based on objective properties of a speaker's language. Accents don't exist as facts in the world that are ready to be described. Rather, accents are equally a property of the listener, more specifically, an idealized listener, who in the United States is often imagined as white, middle class, and monolingual. This is what scholars sometimes call a standard language ideology. Accents are thus shaped by the perspective from which we listen, which presupposes our ideas about which racialized bodies belong and which ones don't. But how about the compliment, you don't have an accent? Why is this not heard as an act of inclusion as it's likely intended? What this praise presupposes is that the language of people of color, as well as those in marginalized positions, more generally, requires scrutiny and evaluation. Their language serves as clues as to whether they belong or whether they don't. They are presumed to be members of a potentially suspect racial class. When the accent of a person of color is assessed, the presupposed question that's hearable is, are you one of us or are you one of them? That is, are you articulate like us or are you just like the rest of them? As the late linguistic anthropologist Jane Hill has noted, one of the main problems with this sort of linguistic scrutiny of people of color is the absence of scrutiny for white middle-class monolinguals. In her analysis of mock Spanish, she notes that when white monolinguals playfully used hyper-anglicized forms of Spanish, hybrid words like el chipo, gracias, and numero uno, they're treated not as a problem, but as evidence of a speaker's personable, humorous, and even cosmopolitan nature. She argued that it's through this asymmetrical treatment of these linguistic hybridities, scrutinized if one has brown skin, and celebrated if one has white skin, that white monolinguals have maintained their privilege. So in this final brief section, I want to present one caveat as we think about how our words reproduce our ideas of racial belonging and marginality. So one of the issues I've addressed in my research are the limitations of anti-racist actions that treat words and phrases like, you don't have an accent as racist. So this might be surprising given what I've said so far. But what I mean to suggest here is that our everyday discussions of racist language tend to focus on two things: whether specific words are racist and whether those who say them are racist. We often become preoccupied with identifying which words we need to include or exclude and how we can teach people to use the right words. In my view, while this is a necessary preliminary step, it's sometimes misdirected, as the solution is sometimes imagined as extracting bad words from our tainted lexicon, or detecting and deciphering racist language and identifying and educating racist people. The risk of this approach is that once these words are removed and these people are rehabilitated, we might be tempted to dust our hands of the problem. Rather, it seems that what our anti-racist actions ought to do is to invite an ongoing critique of widely circulating assumptions about which racialized bodies and speakers get to count as normal or correct. These ideas are inextricably woven into the fabric of our everyday ideas and institutional practices, whether in the grammar we use in our writing, the words we use in our conversations, or the accent that I've learned to use when speaking in academic spaces like this. Thank you.
You're muted, Andrew.
My apologies. Thank you very much, Dr. Chun. It was really very fascinating. Lydia, are you ready to go? I'll put you on spotlight.
Okay. So thank you also for having me today here. So what I'm going to talk about is also very related to what Elaine just explained to us about mock Spanish, but I would like to focus a little bit more on the double standard between monolingual Anglophones when they mix Spanish and English, and bilingual minoritized speakers when they use Spanish and English, or they speak Spanish, they speak English with a Spanish accent in the public sphere. So the public sphere we understand public sphere as a very controlled, heavily policed space where we have to maintain the distinction between languages, where the distinction between languages has to be very sharp. So we are not allowed in the public space to mix English and to mix Spanish. So we have to use them like in a very, we have to use them separate. So, when bilingual speakers of that come from minority communities and racialized communities, when they mix or they use English, they speak Spanish, they speak English with a Spanish pronunciation. Monolingual Anglophones perceive that as a disorder. They perceive that as a threat, as an act which is very impolite, and it's so even dangerous. And that's why they perceive it as a threat to what we consider as white America. And I think we've seen a lot of videos where monolingual Anglophones, they say like, don't speak Spanish, we are in the US, this is America, you have to speak English, even though English is not the official language of the US at the federal level. So always bilingual speakers of that come from a racialized population have to be very careful when they are in public, and the research has shown us that they are always very very anxious and very worried about their accent, because although, as Elaine said, accent is always anchored to some objective practices, foreign accent also has a very cultural dimension. And according to research, we've seen that white monolingual Anglophones, they can hear foreign accent even when objectively there is none. There is no foreign accent. They can hear a foreign accent as long as they can detect signs of racialized identity. So when there is a sign that the person who is speaking is not an Anglophone, is not white, is not monolingual, then they can hear, they can perceive a foreign accent. So while like Puerto Ricans in New York and Mexicans are very, they are always monitored for any sign of accent or non-standard grammar or mispronunciation or vocabulary gaps. White people who mix Spanish with English, they are in public, of course, in their public discourse, they come across, as also Elaine said, they come across as knowledgeable and cosmopolitan. So they do not create any feeling of disorder. They do not create any feeling of threat, or they are not perceived as threat. So they are allowed to mispronounce Spanish words. They are allowed to hyper-anglicized Spanish words. They are allowed to use parodic pronunciation, and again, is not perceived in no way. It's perceived as racism. So, for example, when we heard Trump says there are a lot of bad hombres. So this is what we call mock Spanish, which is a kind of racist, of covert racist discourse, because in order to make sense of that bad hombres, you need to have access to all the negative stereotyps that are associated with the Latinx communities. So, like, they are all the stereotypes that they are like they belong to, they are members of gangs, they are drug dealers, they are they always they are they belong to a violent environment. So if you have access to all these stereotypes, then you can make sense of that bad hombres, and of course, even though it's presented in a very like in a jocular way, it's presented as a joke. It's in reality is always in reality is racist, is a racist discourse. So of course, like bad hombres is like very obvious, but there are some instances where are like less obvious. So what I think, what we should have in mind in order, like there is no list of words that we can say, okay, if you use these words, then this is if you are making fun of Spanish people, you are using mock Spanish, so this is racism. I think what we have to keep in mind is like what's the effect that the use of these words or the use of hyper anglicized pronunciations or mispronunciation is having in the context. So, for example, when Trump said he tried to pronounce Puerto Rico in Spanish, and he said we love Puerto Rico, and he was trying to say it like in Spanish, and then he said, but we also love Puerto Rico, and he tried to say it in an English way. So, I mean, that's my English way. That's also mock Spanish, because he is separating the population of Puerto Ricans into those that they speak Spanish and those that they speak English. So also they create, so there are like two groups, those that they speak Spanish, and I am trying to approach to them, and they speak a language which is complicated, which is difficult, which I cannot, I as a white person, I don't have access to, because it's so weird, so complicated. I cannot even pronounce it. And also those that they speak English and they belong to the hegemonic, supposedly. They belong supposedly to the hegemonic group, or even though they are, or they will always be racialized. Also, also when Trump says make this distinction between these two pronunciations, it makes us feel like as if Puerto Rico is not part of the U.S., like as if it was like a different country, like it doesn't belong to the U.S. territory. So in one way or another, what he creates through this use of the use of mock Spanish, what he's creating is marginalization. So he marginalized an already racialized population. Just in order like to conclude, what I would like to underline is the fact that all these white supremacists and the fact that white people, white Anglophone monolingual people permit themselves to to speak Spanish to mispronounce Spanish, to use to speak Spanish in a parodic with a parodic pronunciation. This is always anchored in a post-colonial logic that reproduces hierarchies, reproduces colonial hierarchies. So always Anglophones, they are going to be higher, and always people from minority communities are always going to be in an inferior social position. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. I think you've really bring it into the present context, particularly in the political discourse that has been going on, certainly in the last years. Unfortunately, it seems like we're still having trouble getting Yossi in, Yossi Zabari in. So my colleague Haggett Halperin has generously volunteered to speak briefly just about the context in Israel, and then we will move to questions. Let me just change the spotlight here. Just 1 second.
Okay, I didn't prepare to speak. I did speak with Yossi about what the subject that can be brought up. Israel in many ways very similar to the United States with some differences, because Israel is in an Arabic world, is located within Arabic world, and the first comers to Israel were European with a small group of actually Yemenites, which is where Yossi Zabari's family is from. Yemenites are much darker and came from villages without, most of them without European education. So they were treated, of course, like primitive people, although many of them most of them learn to read and write Hebrew in Yemen. Oh, what happened? What the accent comes is very strong in Israel. You have big part of the population in Israel comes from Arabic countries, like my parents, for example, who came from Iraq. And it's not so much the color. I mean, some of them are darker, some not. But you recognize the person by the accent, and the Arabic accent, even though it's much more correct for Hebrew, because Hebrew is a Semite language, the Arabic accent in Israel was considered like you are a second class, or you are not as developed, or you are stupid. And one very strong example for me was when I was a child. There was one minister in the government who was Yemenite, and people laughed at him like as if he's stupid. And I just now looked at his Wikipedia, and it was amazing how many things that person did. But in my memory, everybody treated him like he was stupid, and mainly because his accent was Arabic. In Israel also there is a Palestinian accent, and often you just hear the person because they look like us. You hear the accent, you know that he is Palestinian. Unfortunately, Hebrew still is very Europeanized. And I wish as a teacher that it wouldn't be like this, because there are so many opportunity to misspell because we don't pronounce the guttural letters that should have been in Hebrew, but were erased in the European accent. And what Yossi Zabari, the reason I invited, I was like excited about him being, because he's a performer, but he make a case to sound very strongly and proudly his Arabic accent in Hebrew. You would hear the het and the ayin, which I unfortunately don't know to do very well because I grew up in a kibbutz which was more European. But all my relatives, because the mainstream was to speak like European Hebrew. It's in some way it's in the same lines of what was said before me here about the role of accent in how people look at you. And just one more addition, that now the government, like at least the government of Netanyahu, there are many Mizrahi Jews. Mizrahi is those who came from Eastern countries, of course, from Arabic countries. There are many in the government, but none of them speaks with Arabic accent. It's like, so in a way, they were welcome to the government, but becoming Europeanized in the language. How to explain it. So I think I kind of said most of what I wanted.
Well, thank you so much, Agit. It was very sweet of you to step in for Yossi. We'll open it up to questions from all of you now. You can either do so by raising the blue hand, which if you click on participants, you should be able to find, or write them in the chat, and my colleagues and I will try to do our best to ask them. Does anyone have any questions, any comments? All right, Yiju.
Thank you so much for such important and fascinating topics. I don't know how to quite formulate my questions yet. So I think from after hearing three presenters presentations, I'm really impressed by two important issues raised here. One is the modes of registration, namely hearing and the visual side of it. So Elaine's words about how the marginal position is hearable, how the person of color is hearable, and also Lydia's point about how actually there's certain expectation or perception of cultural difference. I assume it's sort of a visual encounter precedes the sound itself. So I'm just fascinated by this sort of interweavement of listening, of the sound and also the visual encounter. That's my first point I want to hear from the speakers again on articulating how these two modes overlap or form tensions in this sort of self-other encounter. And then the second point that really interested me is the power dynamic itself. Elaine's point about how the accent should be shifted from the property of the speaker to the property of the listener is fascinating because it forms a web of power dynamic of the autonomous self, the perfect, the idealized, the self, or the third speaker's point about the European the European accent of Hebrew versus Arabic, the complicated socio-political background is just fascinating. So the second point, I'm sorry that I don't know if I'm making myself clear. So the second point is the power dynamic itself, and I think this is also related to the third part of Elaine's tripartite structure of the solution. How do we question or how do we unravel what is considered to be the normal, to be the center? Thank you. Thank you so much.
Should we just take?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for those amazing questions. Yeah, big questions. The first one is an interesting one, an important one. I think the question was about how signs that are oral or hearable relate to the ones that are visual. And that's one that I think linguists surely need to take into consideration more, because traditionally linguists have focused only on the speaker and often through things like audio recordings, but surely the visual signs do affect. There are studies such as in social psychology, I think, who is it? Donald Rubin, who's done a sort of a classic study of the ways in which students who are perceiving the speech of a TA, and the same speech is presented to students, and one group of students is shown an Asian face versus another group of students with the exact same recording is shown a white face, and the students rate the speaker with the Asian face statistically, I guess more significantly, as having an accent, and also rate them and perform, but the students end up performing worse on a comprehension test. So the visual cues certainly play a role in how we hear things, and that's something that we need to take into consideration, I think, much more. These signs don't exist in isolation, but in the context of other kinds of signs. Yeah, I don't know if Lydia wanted to talk about that particular topic, or
I totally agree with you. I was also thinking about that specific study with the students, with college students. Also, as I said, what we have to keep in mind, as I said before, is the effect of the language that has in the context. So, like as I said, there's no like a list of words that we should avoid, but we have to think of what does this word, or the use of this word, or the use of this pronunciation indexes. So, and also what we should keep also in mind is that is the place of enunciation. That means that if like a member of a Latinx community used like words like, I don't know, like chancla, or like bad hombres, incluso even bad hombres, it's not the same when it's used by a member of a Latinx community, when it is used by a white Anglophone monolingual speaker. So there are a lot of because it in the first case we have it could be a sign of identity, but in the second case it could be a sign of racism. So it's always important who is talking, from what position, and what is saying in what context.
And it looks like, thank you both. And thank you, Yiju, for that really good question. It looks like Yossi Zabari just joined us. So yeah, unfortunately, it looks like his mother was in the hospital. So, but it's very sweet of him to call in right now. So if you start speaking, Yossi, then I can spotlight you.
I hear you anyway, not in my...
It's all good, we hear you.
Okay, so yeah, first of all, I really apologize. I just came back from the hospital. We had like a family emergency. I told you, like in the last couple of days, my mother was feeling very, very bad, and tonight she's in the hospital, and I really hope everything's going to be okay. But I really apologize that I couldn't join earlier. So I wanna introduce myself. I'm an artist. I'm first and foremost, I'm an actor, a theater actor. This is what I'm trained for. This is my biggest my biggest passion, and somewhat my calling even. This is what I've been doing in the last 25 years or so. And in the last 5 or 6 years, I became more political in terms of I took on a new form of art, which is called spoken word genre, which some of you might know. It's a genre that was very famous, still very famous in the US. Started in the mid 80s, and I think around like 10 years ago made a aliyah to Israel, and I'm one of the I don't know, key players. I hope it's not sound cocky, but one of the key players in the scene here in Israel. Spoken word, it revolves around around political issues, around yes, also universal issues, but mainly political Israeli issues. This is what I'm dealing with, and being a Yemenite, and the dark-skinned Yemenite, a gay, and a lefty. The whole three things together makes me kind of a weirdo here in Israel, because it's almost a given that that the Mizrahi Jews, I don't know if you know those terms, and if not, I can elaborate a little bit. But the Mizrahi Jews, the Jews that came from Arab-speaking countries, like 70 years ago, before the state of Israel was formed, I don't know, like, but like automatically they are considered to be righty more than lefty, which is kind of weird to me. I don't know why, but this is like you're immediately you're the immediate suspect of being a righty here in Israel if you look like this. And not only that, you cannot hear that in English, but in Hebrew, I have an accent because I'm using two more sounds that most Israeli do not use, which is the ha and the ah, which are two sounds that you hear in Arabic, but you don't hear in Hebrew. It used to be part of Hebrew as well, but slowly it vanished from the language. I think it's because we wanna be considered. I mean, we as Israeli, I mean, we want to be considered more European, and the throatal vocals are kind of very Middle Eastern slash Arabic, and we don't want to be recognized as those cultures. We want to be recognized as European and white and liberal and modern and all that stuff. So the whole well, now four, basically, I don't know, like four pillars that that I'm consisted of are kind of weird and eccentric here in Israel. I have to admit that I kind of enjoy using them. I mean, it's funny to me that people want me to be a certain way or want me to think certain things. For example, most of the reactions that I get from people are, okay, you became like a slave to the white hegemony here in Israel, and you want them to accept you to their club, but you will never be a part of their club. And I'm saying, listen, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm not trying to be accepted as a member in any club. I'm forming my own club, and if being a humanist, if being against the occupation, if being a somewhat a socialist, okay, I'm not like, I'm not a Kim Jong-un fan, but we being some kind of a socialist, if that makes me I don't know, a slave of some sort, or I don't know, but like I'm not gonna form myself into your molds, into your patterns, into your I don't know, like preliminary thoughts. So yeah, so this is me. Maybe Andrew, maybe you can help me out by like asking me a question so I can answer it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think so I think Haggett had kind of replaced you, had ventriloquized you a little bit.
Haggett, how could you?
So we had kind of moved to the questioning stage. So I think there are some different questions that are coming about, and I mean, one of the questions that I think you just addressed a little bit, but maybe you can, I don't know if you could give a slightly more historical one, and I think the other speakers can do it in their context, but as a student has a question about, how do these accents, how does the European English accent come about as being the kind of dominant accent, such as, and different from other ones, such as Spanish English accents or Arabic Israeli accents or whatever those types of other accents are. Anyway, that's one of the questions that's in the chat right now but maybe just talking a little bit about, at what point do these sounds start disappearing in Israeli, in the kind of Israeli Europeanized pronunciation?
Well, thank you for Kyla, I think she was the one asking the question. Thank you, Andrew. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm already 48, and around my generation, there are very few people who still, kept on talking like this. Sometimes people ask me, why do you choose to speak like that? Well, I didn't choose anything. It's not like I decided to take upon those, a mission to maintain the Yemeni accent or whatever. It's not that. This is how I grew up. This is, I went to the, in Yemeni, it's called the Mori. Like you go to an after school and you learn how to read the Torah in a Yemenite accent. And this is what I've been doing even before I went to school. So like I became, when I went to first grade, I already knew how to read with no, in Hebrew you have like all kinds of, what's the word? Hagid, maybe help me out. Like you have like the excuse me?
Vowels?
It's not exactly the vowel. How can you could?
Vowels.
Okay. So I could read and also like upside down and everything. And this is like a part of the training that a Yemenite kid go through. So I never spoke differently. So there was nothing for me to choose from. And today that I know that I can eliminate those sounds. Okay, I mean they exist in my palate. They exist in my day-to-day, in my daily vocabulary. Okay, because the sounds and the sounds still are also exist in the Hebrew language. So for me, it's like giving up something. It's like being able to play, I don't know, like 7 octaves and then take one off and say, okay, I'm gonna play only in 6 from now on. And especially being a theater actor, which is like my vocals, my throat, my voice is the main tool that I'm dealing with. I feel like something is weird. Something becomes weird in my pronunciation. It makes me smaller. Sometimes when a director tries to ask me to speak differently in order to confirm, in order to be like the rest of the actors on stage, I'm trying to do that. But he immediately feels that there's something wrong, that something in my voice is changing, something in the way that I act changes. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's like putting restraints on myself, and I hate it. Okay, like especially as a kid. Okay, like if I was to talk in the Ashkenazi way, so my mother would slap me or something. She would say like, what's going on with your voice? Like, is there something wrong? Like, why can't you speak like a human being? Like you don't have to confirm. You don't have to be like the other people. You have your own voice. Use it, please. So it never even occurred to me to speak differently. And a lot of my generation, they already stopped doing that. I sometimes even hear my sister. My sister is 5 years older than me, and she's a teacher. Well, actually, she's a headmaster in school. And nowadays, when I hear her speak in conventions, she is trying to it's not vanished, but to diminish those sounds. And she makes them much more gentler than than I used to hear her talk. And yes, it's yes, Kyla, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. It is part of the colonialism. It is part of Zionism. It is part of trying to be the white the white privileged man, like the German ones, like the German are very very much there are a lot of German people in Israel, but yeah, it's part of being European, okay, and it's part of turning our back to the culture that we are immersed in, okay, because the area that we live in is the Middle East, okay. We have like Egypt in the south and Lebanon and Syria on the north and Jordan on the east. So like we are immersed in Arab speaking countries, in Arab culture, and we are turning our face from it, or we turn our backs to it. And I think this is part of why we are like really struggling with being part of this area, like this is, for us, it's still something that considered second best to be Arab. Okay, like when the Arabs Jew, okay, the Arab Jews came like around the 40s, 30s and 40s, they immediately changed their title. Instead of being called Arab Jews, they became Mizrahi, okay, people who came from the East, from the Eastern countries. But I wrote a poetry song about that, or poetry, I don't know, like how do you say, a spoken word song or a bit about it. And it made really, it was very, like, it made a real buzz around me, because like all of a sudden I decided to call myself the way that I'm thinking about myself. Yeah, I'm an Arab Jew. Okay, I'm confused. I'm not sure what my origins are because I've never been to Yemen. In the last couple of years, I'm learning Arabic, but it's not. Even though I have my throat is like built for the Arabic language, I still have problems, you know, learning the actual language. And it's not easier for me to speak in English and understand English. So in a way, it's like I am confused about my origins and about the culture that I came from. And today there is like a how it's like a recognition, or trying to go back to this culture and learn it and find it and understand it, and not be ashamed of it. I think for the main part.
Thank you. There's a question. There's a question from Victor Don I think for Elaine. The idea that acting and speaking European or American means that you are modern or educated is often prevalent in society. I'm sorry, actually, there's a question before that. Can you comment, this from Antoinette Durunzio, can you comment on the reaction of students whose professors speak English with a background in an Asian language? Some students complained that they could not understand their instructor and wanted to change to another class taught by a monolingual English speaker. How do I encourage the students to wait to become used to the instructor's speech?
This is for me?
This one's for Elaine, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a tough question, but a good question, and a question that I'm sure many college students encounter. I don't have any sort of easy answers to this, but I think what this phenomenon reflects is the fact that we do have a general system in place that privileges English, first of all, and a particular kind of English, and that rather than focusing on the students themselves as being racist, I think it's more productive to understand the broader system in which they are made to feel that they can't understand. I'm not saying that they should be absolved of blame, but it's the broader, the privileging of English that is creating this particular dynamic and this response by students. But I do think that I think as the question sort of implies, part of it is the unwillingness of students to want to understand speakers with English as an L2, a second language. And surely by listening, practicing and listening, one can become a willing listener and be able to comprehend better. So I don't know if that's sufficient.
Thank you, Elaine. Victor, I think it was just more of a comment than a question, but it says the idea that acting and speaking European or American means that you are more modern or educated is often prevalent in society. The children of immigrants who speak without a heavy accent may be seen as evidence that they have integrated into a new modern culture completely, or the language of their parents is associated with poverty and rural stereotypes. I don't know if any of the three of you want to comment on that comment, or.
Well, I guess it's partly right, but I think this means that you have to, again, like I said earlier, you have to. It is as if you want to become assimilated so much and so bad that you turn your back to the culture that you grew up with or in, and yeah, I mean, all kids are kind of ashamed in their parents. It doesn't matter if you're Asian or if you're Arab or if you are, you know, sufficient enough that you'll be short or that your mother would hug you too much, you know. So like kids are ashamed of their parents everywhere. I think we've learned today, my generation at least, like we've learned that we are missing a huge part in our culture. And this is why we go back. Like there's a lot of literature and there's a lot of theater and there's a lot of art revolves around at least again from my part around like Yemen roots, either in singing or in dancing or in writing, because I feel that this is a huge part that is missing for me. For example, my mother, as I told you, she's 86 years old. Every time you want to ask her about how she came from Yemen to Israel and what happened to her here, she blocked that that period of time. She's very much reluctant to speak about that. I think they went through today. I know that they went through a trauma. You know, they used to have like you call that sideburns for Yemens. They would grow them. So when they came to Israel, they cut them off. I mean, the Jewish agency, whoever, like decided that they should cut it off. There was a kidnapping of Yemenite kids, and I'm sure you heard of that. So as much as I understand, the Yemen culture at least suffered or went through this trauma, and today we are kind of we're kind of I don't know, like what's the word menaches hagit, like how would you say menaches, or like taking it back or owning it, okay, owning our culture and searching for it and looking for it and not being ashamed of it.
Thank you. There's a question from one of my colleagues, Jenny Meyer. Is there enough inoffensive, and this is to any of the speakers, is there an inoffensive way to inquire about someone's linguistic geographic background? I think there's obviously a lot of people who are very curious, particularly people who like speaking languages when they hear different accents. So I guess the question is, what is the inoffensive way to make that inquiry?
So can I answer?
Sure, go ahead.
So I would also like to comment to the previous question, the previous comment. I would like to add something to that. But as for if there is an innocent way, I think by being aware of what you are really asking. If you are, I mean, I think you have to ask yourself, what am I asking? What am I aware of the effects of my question? I think awareness, creating awareness to students, creating awareness, being aware of what you say and how you say it. I think it can lead to inoffensive ways of asking where you are from, or asking about the background, cultural background, etc. So I think our first step is creating awareness, being aware, creating awareness to our students. So about like why, for example, in the case of foreign professors, like why you do not understand, why you are not, what's that you do not understand about that professor. Like, are you aware of the implications of that? So what are you asking? Are you aware of the implications of your questions? Like, are you using like stereotypes? Are you using like negative stereotypes? Are you using, what kind of stereotypes are you using? What kind of stereotypes is your question anchored in? So I think if I don't think that there is we can provide like instructions like, one, you have to do this, two, you have to do that. But I think that here the key is awareness. I don't know if Elaine would like to add something.
Yeah, I think exactly along those lines. It's not about. I mean, part of I think what I was trying to say is that it's not about the specific words that are racist or not racist. Racism is not located in the words, but rather the broader context in which those words are uttered, and as Lydia says, the particular ideological effects of those words. And so, yes, I mean, I guess the simple answer is that there is a way. I think there is a way, but when that question does get asked to a person of color, part of the inescapable context is that this person has encountered that question in many other contexts of having and of feeling marginalized as a result of that question. And so that's inescapable. I mean, that's a context that can't be removed. But I suppose from a sort of, what can you do given the situation? I think you could, if you establish a relationship and establish a mutual sort of trust with a person, and it's clear that the question is not about marginalization, but rather maybe that person brought up some issue having to do with region or place, and that became a relevant topic of conversation, I think it would likely be perceived as less offensive.
You didn't get to hear this, Yossi, but when Elaine started her presentation today, she referenced Apu from The Simpsons, who's played by Hank Azaria, I believe, and who generates an Indian accent. And I'm just wondering, as an actor, as someone who is asked to be in roles, you've talked a little bit about this, but how do you ethically approach the accents that you're supposed to take on as an actor?
Well, funny enough, I don't have to do that. I don't have to take any accent. Here in Israel, in theater, you hardly use. I mean, you hardly take on any really foreign accent. I mean, if somebody want to play like an old Polish Jewish from the shtetl, from the 20th century, they wouldn't give this role to me. Okay, so they would give it to a person who looks like that. But for me, as I said, I'm doing the opposite. Okay, I will tell you a short story, and maybe you will understand by this example. We had a show here in Israel after a Hans Palada book, which is called Kleiner Mann was nun, Little Man, What's Now. It's a very famous book, and I played one of the main characters in the book, which his name is Heilbut. He's German. He's in the book. He's blonde curled German, very Aryan, very very stereotype of the German in the 40s, and I got this role, and I think I even enjoyed acting it in my accent, in the very, very much very correct Hebrew accent, with the way that I look, and trying to tell to the audience, listen, this is theater. You know that you're in theater. You know that you are gonna go out in half an hour or an hour, go back to your place. You live in Tel Aviv. We are in 2000 whatever. This is not Germany in the 1940s. This is theater. And in theater, I can be Heilbut, or I can be Hamlet, or I can be whatever I want to be if I have enough talent, of course, yeah. But this is theater, and we don't have to reenact the reality. I mean, we can be whoever we want to. So for me, I really don't have to do that. I think sometimes they are asking me to play Arab roles, which you have to put on like an Arab accent, like an Arab Palestinian modern accent. I don't mean like only the two vowels that I have extra, but it's more of the melody of the language. So yes, so sometimes I have to do that, but this is like scarcely happen. Most of the time, I'm just acting in my own voice. Maybe I'm playing myself older, but it's still the same, the same music. I don't have to put on any accent. So I'm sorry that I don't really can answer your question.
I think you did very well. Thank you. We're at 3:35, so we're a little bit over already. I don't know if there are any final comments any of you wish to make, but then we probably need to stop because I know everyone has to move on to other things. Are there any final words for any of you, from the three of you?
I just would like to comment the idea of modernity and the fact that being being immersed in the Anglophone culture is considered modern, and when you maintain your parents' culture, then it's considered, as they said, like uneducated or rural. I think we need to reconsider these notions of modernity, what's modern, what's educated, and what's rural, or it's not uneducated, because these are like highly problematic. The fact that that immigrants they are receiving so much pressure in order like to be part of the Anglophone culture is as I said before, is a question of repeating like post-colonial hierarchies. So why maintaining your parent culture is bad? Why maintaining your mother tongue is bad? Is a sign of being uneducated? Because why is a sign of being being not modern? Why being Anglophone is a sign of being modern and a sign of advanced, of being considered like part of an advanced civilization? Like all these ideas I think that they are like highly problematic, and I don't want to develop this idea because we are like it's already like 3:38 and you want to leave. But what I want just to say, it's like the ideas like of what's modern and what's positive and what's not modern and what's negative. I think it should be like very problematized and re-articulate, and remember that all these notions what they actually do is maintain hierarchies, and they maintain people of racialized and minority populations marginalized.
Thank you, Lydia.
I can say just one final thing. I saw a few questions about colonialism, and I do agree that the hierarchies of colonialism are very difficult to disrupt. Someone had asked a question, can the meanings shift? I think that meanings can shift, but they're often very temporary, in temporary sort of spaces of comedy, of theater, but those are still spaces where they do get disrupted. And so those might be hopeful places. I know some questions were about what can we do, so we can look towards particular, contexts in which those hierarchies do get disrupted. And also to remember that racism isn't, I don't think racism is a black or white issue, metaphorically speaking. I think it's, there are ways in which our actions can be racist in particular. The same action can be racist in certain ways, but maybe even anti-racist in other ways. It's not like an on and off switch. Okay.
Thank you, Elaine.
Really, well, I totally agree with what Elaine said, and I want to take on from what she said. It's also to take it, to maybe divert a little bit from racism, at least like in Hebrew. Again, I don't know if there are any Hebrew speakers in the audience or people who know Hebrew. As much as I know, like it's one of the, well, it's not the only language, but I think maybe there's not a lot of languages that the pronunciation or the verbs for male and female are pretty much different. And today, at least in the Hebrew language, there's a process of trying to make the pronunciation, through the pronunciation, to make the equality between the genders and between the sexes, because in Hebrew, you pretty much, like when you talk to a bunch of men, it's okay to talk to them as if you talk to you will talk to men, even if there are women in the audience, but you would never do the other way around. Okay, even if there are like 100 men and excuse me, if there are like 100 women and 1 man, you would approach them as a group of men. Okay, which is today slowly by slowly is changing. And I think to add to what Elaine said, like racism is like it's not a thing, it's not a one dimensional thing, you know. It has all kinds of shapes and forms, and it takes on and off all kinds of shapes and forms actually. So as a person who's dealing with language and with words, I think we need to change our culture through the language. This is it, I guess.
Thank you. Elaine, Lydia, and Yossi, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and sharing your perspectives and your deep understandings, both from a kind of lived experience as well as a scholarly and professional experience. So I think it, particularly with Yossi's final comments, it brings us back to the panel we had on exploding the gender binary, where we're talking specifically about some of these questions of how to go beyond the kind of male-female divide in many of the languages that we use. So thank you all. Thanks to the public for being here. And we hope to continue this in the spring with 4 more panels if possible and if funding comes through. But we really appreciate the great support we've had from all the students and faculty and general public, and the generous gift of time from our speakers sharing their expertise with us. So thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you, Yossi. And I hope to see you all in the future. And we hope your mother is okay, Yossi.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Again, I'm sorry, but have her in your prayers tonight.
All right, we will. Take care. Thank you all. And this will be up on the YouTube channel with all of the other videos. All right. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Hagit, for getting Yossi to come through. Appreciate it. Very sweet of you. And Elaine and Lydia, thank you for allowing the additional speech time to come in and stuff like that. I'm sorry it interrupted the momentum of the questions a little bit, but I think it was very worthwhile having him. So
yeah, I'm glad he was able to join. Okay.
Thank you so much, Elaine. It was really interesting, and it was very helpful. I think mapping it all out in the way you did in the beginning. I think it really helped with the way the second and third talks, were able to be kind of interpreted and digested and stuff. So thank you.
Great, thanks. I mean, it was fun to hear the question. I'm sorry we didn't get to answer all the questions, but yeah, I enjoyed it. And yeah, thanks for organizing it and inviting us. Yeah.
You're welcome. And I'll send you the link once it's up on the once it is up on YouTube. So
okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
I gotta run to a Arts and Science Council meeting.
Bye.